Thank you all for being here at our panel, The Future of Work. And this is an WAFA event, and WAFA stands for Wharton Alumni Founders and Funders Association, and it's a nonprofit organization. And its mission is to accelerate the success of Penn Wharton female founders and investors. Today, about 13% of Penn founders are women, but they raise just 6% of VC capital. WAFA harnessed the power of the Penn Wharton network to educate, support, and foster the connection for female founders and funders. So first I'm going to go over just some quick house rules. So if everybody sees the Q&A box here, you can leave messages or you can ask questions to the panelists. And the structure of the talk is going to be four sections, and after each section, I will take some Q&A questions. And then at the end, we're going to open it for general Q&A. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Alice Chen. She is the co-founder of WAFA.
Thanks, Carol. And thanks for a nice plugging of WAFA. So I'm co-founder of WAFA, like Carol mentioned. I founded this nonprofit organization about 2 years ago, really with the goal to foster a community to empower women. But anyway, I'm also a founder of Incubate Me, a startup I'm actually launching as of today. With that being said, I would like to start the session with a quote by Charles Dickens in his opening paragraph of his novel, A Tale of Two Cities. So it reads, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity." I find this quote is quite fitting to describe the world where we live right now in terms of prior and post-COVID. Taking my own experience as an example, my experience with WAFA prior to COVID, as some of you know, WAFA, we organize many events within the community. So prior to COVID, I would say on average, we organize one event, mainly person-to-person local events per month. And our average attendance rate is about, I would say, 20 to 30 people. It's face-to-face, and our cost ranges from I would say anywhere between maybe $100 to a couple $100, because we have to spend, I would say, renting venues, some cost on food and some cost on gifts or souvenir. And with the COVID, we were pushed to jump onto the digital event bandwagon. We weren't doing it automatically, but we were really forced to do that. But what surprised me very pleasantly is that, like, soon after we pushed to digital event, now we're running, I would say, one event per week. And for each event, we have anywhere between 200 to 300 subscribers. And our cost of running each event is almost zero. So it is amazing, I would say, just when I look at WAFA, it's amazing prior and post. But in the same time, we're so physically restricted in California and San Francisco, where I am right now. We're shelter in place. I've been shelter in place for 2 months. So it's this opposite, kind of extreme opposite of each other happening at the same time, which makes, I would say, makes us a little bit confusing. I think that relates to today's discussion. Is really to talk about what we gain from COVID, this pandemic, what we may lose because of this pandemic, what we may gain permanently or what we may lose permanently, and how we can not only adapt to many of the new norms we're going to face after the pandemic, but also how can we proactively take advantage of some of the new norms, and even further, maybe we can capitalize on that, or thrive on some of the new, I would say, norms. So with that being said, I'd like to move to introduction of the panel, and I'm going to start with Lauren. Lauren, why don't you give yourself a self-introduction, and I'm going to throw my first question into you. Why don't you start by sharing from your perspective, you know, as an executive recruiter and placement founder of an executive placement firm, what do you see as the biggest impact COVID-19 has brought in your world?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Alice, for having us, and to the whole WAFA group for getting this all together. It's great to be here tonight. And so a little bit about me. I'm the founder of Preceda Placements, which is an executive recruiting firm focused on placing women in leadership roles. We work on mostly VP and C-suite level searches, and we work with clients really spanning across industries, geographies, function areas. Our only focus is knowing outstanding female talent. So with that in mind, as it relates to sort of the impact, COVID's impact on recruiting and placement, I would say, in my experience and in conversations I've been having with people, I think a lot of companies are more impacted than they originally anticipated. You know, even those who at first thought they might be insulated, they just raised around, they felt like, oh, we can make this thing last for a couple of months. The sort of longer lasting, farther reaching impact, I think, is sort of starting to set in right now. And hiring is absolutely affected. I've seen all kinds of statistics, and I've been trying to find some real concrete numbers. I don't think there really are any, but I would say around 60% of companies are on some type of hiring freeze. I mean, that being said, there's still a lot of companies that are hiring right now. And as everyone knows, there are specific industries where things are going actually quite well and kind of booming. So, you know, while it is sort of a difficult time, if you're a candidate on the market, I would say there definitely are opportunities out there, and there are companies that are hiring. I mean, we're closing searches, we're interviewing candidates and placing candidates who have literally never been to the office of where they're going to work and have never met anyone in person. So that's, I mean, it seems pretty different than what we would have seen in February or early March, but it's absolutely still happening.
Great. Lauren, so you talk about 60% of companies are having some kind of freeze right now. What would be your advice to, let's say, executives who might be thinking about a career move? And specifically, you said there are some other companies that are still hiring, and you know, from my experience too, COVID may expedite in certain industries or certain kind of companies versus, you know, kind of disrupt in a negative way in other industries or companies. Can you give more specific, I would say, insight or advice on, you know, career move? Should they put on hold, waited things out, or specifically in which part of the industry or area someone might be good to make a move right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are having a big slowdown in their life right now. And whether that means like your work has slowed down or you're just not like running back and forth to social engagements or whatever it is. And to me, it seems like a good time to maybe evaluate where you are and sort of what you want and how you want your life to look after, or, you know, whatever that may look like. So I actually do think it's a really good time for people to reevaluate and kind of make a game plan of where they want to go next. I think that there's going to be a window when people, like a lot of these companies that have furloughed or laid off a bunch of employees, are in conversations right now about like, who are we going to have to backfill? And there's going to be a time when that kind of switch flips on. So this is actually a really great window for whether or not you're working right now, to think about if you do want to go into something else or go somewhere new, where might that be and how can you set yourself up for success there? In terms of sort of industries that seem to be doing well, I mean, I think there's a lot of like software companies that are doing well, specifically in like data stuff, telehealth, ed tech, those types of things. But there's still questions around like what the longer term effects will be. And this is also something I think that Nikki, you've thought a lot about as well. So if you want to chime in here, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, just in terms of companies that are hiring or booming, you know, I think digital health, you know, anything you're using today, right, of the limited like things you're using.
Workplace tools, yeah.
Workplace tools, on-demand logistics. I mean, there are companies hiring, and I you know, I definitely agree with Lauren in terms of, you know, at least personally have definitely felt like the slowdown has made me reevaluate my life in terms of work and not just work. And I think that is a refreshing thing to do, to kind of be taken out of the rat race. So I love that advice as well. But I think, you know, we've talked a lot about there kind of being this immediate reaction to the pandemic and the market drop and the shelter in place. And, you know, I think, you know, there will be an end to this. There will be a vaccine, like things will recover. And I think as soon as people have that line of sight and a sense of that timing is really when, you know, I think hiring will commence again in a strong way, like Lauren was saying. Is that in October? Is that next March? Like that is kind of the question, is the when. But you know, if you have it's definitely going to come. It's just a matter of like the flexibility around that. And, you know, obviously different functions are more sensitive to being cut first. But on the flip side, when there's growth again, those are the ones that come back in full swing. So.
And you can also think about if you're someone who's in an industry that's getting hit really hard, you can think about sort of how you can pivot the skills that you have there into something else. I mean, I can tell you as a recruiter that we look at people from other industries than just the one that we're hiring in. And that's definitely something you can do at any point in your career, is move from one thing to another. So I wouldn't, you know, don't feel like you're stuck wherever you are.
Great. Carol, I know you have a question regarding maybe women versus the impact of women versus non-women. Would you want to throw that question out here now?
Yes. So Lauren, what do you think, what's the difference? Like, how have women and men been affected differently by this crisis?
Absolutely. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot as a woman myself. And I found a study that was put out by the National Bureau of Economic Research about sort of like the top positives and negatives of this situation as it relates to women. And I would say the main things that I've seen in a lot of articles on this subject is that the downsides are kind of the obvious, that the lack of childcare is a major issue for working mothers and much more affects mothers much more than fathers. And that's kind of been shown. And this current recession has also been worse than others in its impact on female jobs. So more essential workers are men than women. And there are a higher number of women employees in the restaurant business, the travel business, the retail business, a lot of those sort of really heavy hit areas. So that's sort of the downside. But on the other end of the spectrum, I guess like the adaptability that we've had to see of businesses to allow for work from home and allow for giving me an hour to help my kid figure out how to get on their Zoom kindergarten class or whatever. That is going to, I think that's going to really push businesses forward towards a much more flexible work environment. And that I think will stand to benefit mothers in a longer term when they will have access to childcare again. And then the other piece is that there is sort of this a sort of growing normalization of fathers becoming more primary caretakers, and sort of the normalization of that will absolutely stand to benefit women, I think, in the long run. So there's definitely upsides and downsides, but yeah, there's sort of two sides of the coin there.
Could I do a follow-up question? So as a woman, and you're switching job and you have children, like, is now the best time to be switching a job? Because I feel like the first like 3 months are the most important. And if you have a child at home, like, what's your advice about that?
I think that companies are being so open and kind to their employees right now on this subject. I mean, I was just today seeing the CHRO of Freddie Mac was talking on CNBC about sort of their plans for the future and like bringing people back to work. And she was saying, you know, like, we're giving people unlimited sick leave if anyone in their family directly affected by COVID. We're making sure that people can take an hour here or an hour there if they have to, you know, pick up, drop off a kid in like some different childcare situation. So the sort of flexibility and understanding and humanization of your relationship with your work, I think that's going to keep happening. And just this sort of like, if you think about these Zoom calls that we're on all the time, like animals and kids running in and out of them, you know, it just sort of has like changed the narrative and the vibe of how you interact with your colleagues. So even in the early stages of a new job, I think that's still going to be the case.
All right, great. Thanks.
Could I ask a question from Wendy? So this is a question for Laura. How can companies prepare themselves to make the best decision given the immense number of highly qualified candidates who are looking for employment?
That's a great question. And I think, I mean, as I think about the way hiring is going to look now, it's obviously very different. I mean, a lot of companies used to put a lot of weight on those in-person interviews and the relationship making that you have in person. And obviously that's not happening right now. I would say you're probably going to talk to a higher number of candidates for those searches than you may have normally, which is a good thing. And then I think you just have to be really clear with yourself about what exactly it is you're looking for and not try to boil the ocean, because this is something that I see a lot with my clients where they're looking for something pretty specific. And when they do find that, we always encourage them to sort of jump for that candidate, because at that point, like, there could be other people that could also do it. But since this person ticks all the boxes of what we were originally looking for, we want to move forward with them. So I would say, you know, you might end up talking to more candidates than you normally would. But once you find the person who fits all the specifications that you set out in the beginning, I would say, you know, go forward with them, because there might be more qualified candidates out there, but it ends up being a waste of time if you continue talking to everyone that exists who could do the job.
That's a great insight. With that, though, I would like to move on to Madison. Madison, I know you have worked extensively with some of the leading technology companies, you know, like Microsoft, Google. So from more of the, you know, bigger and kind of role model technology company perspective, would you like to, of course, introduce yourself first and share some of the insights about how those companies are planning their, go back to work?
Yeah, well, thank you, Alice and WAFA. And yeah, first and foremost, again, thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be a part of this panel. These are some great people here. And yeah, you're exactly right. My firm, SPMB, is an executive search firm based in San Francisco. And we work with tech companies ranging from the largest of public companies like Google to startups that have just raised a Series A from venture capital firms here in the Bay Area and across the country as well. And over the last 2 months, we've obviously had a ton of interaction with leaders at these companies. And as expected, there's a huge spotlight on talent. I think business leaders are assessing where their recruiting needs lie, how they've changed. HR leaders are trying to understand how to keep their employees happy and healthy. And then ultimately, the question comes down to, when are we getting back to the office? And it's not necessarily getting back to work. And actually, I'll preface this by saying I'm going to only talk about technology companies. I know industries outside of tech have been affected much differently, and I don't have a lot of experience in that area, so I'm going to speak to technology companies as that's where our experience at SPMB lies. So what I'll say kind of like first and foremost is that, well, first of all, getting back to work is not really the right question, because we've all been working, of course, and trying to make it work under the circumstances, but it's more, how do you get back to the office? And that's the question that everyone's asking. And I think big companies like Google, Microsoft, a lot of other Seattle and Bay Area companies are thinking about is, how do we get back to the office? And what I'll say first and foremost is that it's not a straight line at all. In the most cliched of terms, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I will probably take a more like aggressive stance right now in that there's a pre-COVID and a post-COVID, and what we and big companies now are doing is going to define what the post-COVID world looks like. And I think that's clearly indicative by what Twitter announced last week, which is that employees will never have to go back to the office. And as I was putting my thoughts together today, I ultimately believe that many companies will follow suit, many tech companies will follow suit. And that really changes the entire landscape of recruiting. I know Coinbase, which is a fintech startup based here in the Bay Area, actually just announced today that they will promote a remote first policy going forward after COVID. So again, there's a pre-COVID, a post-COVID, and what we do now defines what that post-COVID looks like. Fundamentally, the idea of a corporate culture is completely turned upside down. If you think about Twitter and Coinbase and Google and Facebook, who announced that they're not going to have people come back until at least 2021, or mandated people come back till 2021, you start to try to figure out recruiting strategies. And back to Wendy's question, how do companies change hiring strategies based on that? And it's actually now not about the corporate culture, which is what Google and Microsoft for so long have been reeling people in. It's about who has the best remote first policy, who gives money for work from home setups. And there's a lot of implications about that, but it's a totally kind of, I guess my main message is that the world is, what is happening now will have a long lasting impact on tech companies, the talent there, and ultimately how you offer a differentiated experience, basically.
Well, yeah, that's great insight, and just prompt me to have so many thoughts. Because I prior to starting my company, I was a corporate citizen. What exactly are some of the implications down the road? I mean, does that mean I think on the good side, from company recruiting perspective, maybe they have a broader access to a larger pool of talent, across like the country or even globe, versus more local based. But and they may save cost from company wise, right, on those like office rentals. But what are the implications for employees? Does that mean competition gonna be more fierce? Like they're their ability to quote a higher price tag for the role they're applying would, it's more of a buyer's market for recruiters. Will people start to, moving away from the city? Just so many thoughts. Would you like to give some, like from your take, also in terms of like timeline, you think which may take precedence over the other? I know it's a lot of ask, but anyway, can you share your further thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess, it's not that the effect is the work from home. I think the cause is that we're now going to be remote, or there's a decentralization happening, and the result or the impact is across a variety of factors. I think there's a general reevaluation, a complete reevaluation of what one's personal space looks like. And fundamentally, you don't get a lot of space in Seattle, San Francisco, or New York. So if Twitter now says you can work, you never have to come back to the office, you start to think about, okay, so how do I set up, how do I make the most for myself? And this is what Lauren was saying, right? We're reevaluating what our lives look like. And I think everyone's going through that experience. Companies are certainly trying to understand what the offering that they can give to their remote first workforce. I do think there's a shift outside of cities that's going to happen. I think when you just want more space, and when you think about the amount of people that are in one house that are now working remote, you just need square footage. And that brings up questions about, if companies are saving costs on overhead because you go from 10 floors in San Francisco to 1 floor in San Francisco because capacity goes down from 100, or let's say 90% working in office and only 10 working remote, and now it's 20% in office, 80% remote. So you decrease capacity, your space by 80%. Do those cost savings go to the employee? That's obviously a question that I can't answer. I think that when companies are looking for good talent right now, and there's obviously a lot of good talent out there, they're going to be asking those questions. What are you going to offer me in a remote first scenario? So I think that's certainly top of mind. And again, going back to my point, as companies reevaluate their corporate culture, and there really is no corporate culture anymore, or an in-office corporate culture, you have to make up for it in other ways. I'll tell you from experience, or personally, what I'm seeing right now at our firm is that we no longer care about, we no longer have the impediment of location. So on executive hiring searches that we were doing, where we were really stymied by location. Let's say, for example, we were looking for an entertainment exec, and they are a long-time LA person, but now you have Quibi and the likes of these entertainment tech companies that are based in San Francisco. Quibi's in LA, but for example, entertainment companies that are in San Francisco. There was a point at one time where we would say, no, you absolutely need to relocate to the Bay from LA. Though that's completely upended. So you get more access to talent across the country. You can be anywhere now, and you really have to start defining what are the perks of your company outside of the corporate of the in-office corporate culture.
Well, that's great. Carol, you've got any questions for Madison?
Yes, I have a question here from one attendee. How will compensation be affected when people can work in less expensive areas?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot. The price tags are not going down. I'll be clear about that when it comes to recruiting. I'm not seeing any dips in price, in the value of these roles. And I think that's good. I wouldn't expect, again, I'm speaking to tech companies, but you never typically see top talent always, if you're attracting top talent, they're going to continue to expect a certain level of compensation. I don't think that people are going to expect less living in more rural areas. I think it's going to be a reset. San Francisco won't be, I don't know, 6,000 for a 1-bedroom, which thank God. But they're going to want to be compensated for not having a corporate culture. So for example, if you're a working mom and you're now not mandated work from home, but it's I would say encouraged, because that's what everyone else is doing. why would I want to give up any compensation when I now have to pay for childcare, or when I now have to pay for an extra sort of daycare? I don't really see a world where companies can get away with a decreasing value of roles.
Got it.
Hopefully that is the case.
No, thanks. That's really insightful.
Could I ask, here's another question from JJ. Right now, the phrase, it's phrased as you don't have to go back to the office, but when could it become you don't get to go back to the office? Offices are expensive, and is there a thought like some employees are better remote permanently for cost reason, regardless of whether they rather be in the office?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that businesses are businesses, and if they can get away with less office space in New York and San Francisco, they will certainly do it. Now, what I think is important is communication. So you've seen, and I highly suggest reading the blog post that Coinbase released today, the CEO, because they have a lot of good points about what a remote first culture means, not a remote only, but a remote first, like prioritizing remote employees, basically. It's really insightful. And they are clearly communicating that you can come into the office when you want to. That is the correct message to send. And I think that communication above all is more important than anything else right now. I think that's clear when it comes to the way that Airbnb is obviously laying people off, and Uber, for example. Communication is the number one thing you can do for your employees. But I think it's not a you don't get to, it's just that there will be limitations. You can come in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or you're in section A or you're in section B, you get these days. Like when you move from 10 floors to 1, or when you decrease by 80%, there's obviously not enough desks. The whole space is going to be reimagined, and we can go into that at some other point, but you certainly are going to be limited in how much access you have to the space is what I think. That's a good question.
Wow. So anyway, it's refreshing. Definitely our corporate lives will change a lot, sounds like.
Yes, that's for sure.
Well, right. Thanks, Madison. I'm gonna move on to Nikki. Nikki, you have been intimately involved with, I would say, investing technologies that enable and empower remote working. So we just talk about those big tech companies. Seems like they are leading the pack of moving towards more remote working or remote first culture. So from technology enablement or investment perspective, I know you already started talking about and beginning. Would you like to share more your thoughts? Obviously, introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Chimed in a little early, but I'm Nikki. I work at a firm in San Francisco called Streamline Ventures. We're a seed investment fund investing primarily in data science and applied AI startups at the very early stages. But have invested in on-demand logistics, telemedicine, e-commerce, and a wide variety of other sectors that aren't just related to data science. Obviously this has been a time where we all personally are very intimately involved with the technologies we're using, but also, as an early stage investment firm, thinking about, our firm, we make about an investment every single month. So thinking about, what are the opportunities that are coming along, how is the world going to change, and, what businesses will be built out of this chaos that provides opportunities for people to fix problems with new products. And so something I think that we've really seen is that a lot of these sectors that are booming because with what we call like COVID tailwinds, these aren't like new trends, right? I mean, you think about, Zoom. Yes, Zoom went from, I don't know, 20 million daily active users to like 300 million in 3 months. And all I know is my 85-year-old grandma sent me a Zoom link for a yoga class. So I think like, that says a lot. But, Zoom went public last year. It already was a growing company. People are already doing remote meetings. I mean, same with Slack, same with, I know when Lauren, for example, founded her business like a couple of years ago, that was, she didn't have an office. Like that's kind of a lot of ways people work. So I think, that along with, e-commerce is another good example. Telemedicine, I think, is probably the one that's seeing like the most change in actual behavior for the better in a lot of ways. But all these things aren't really new. And I think, what's really enabled us to work from home, and yet, I think can talk about like where there's still opportunities is, cloud, like the fact that we have like the cloud, like that's been around for 20 years, but in some ways, like, so much has shut down and so many people have struggled by losing their jobs from COVID. And yet sometimes I'm just astounded by how much my life hasn't changed, and like how much I'm still able to do, given technology. Like I'm able to eat from my favorite restaurants, and I work out with the same workout instructors, and I talk to my friends and colleagues. And I think that's like astounding how much technology has enabled us to kind of stay at home. And so, I think obviously like the move to the cloud is probably the biggest. Like you don't have to run servers in your office. You don't have to be in your office to access your data, to access your software, to access your records. So that lets us work from home. Talked a little bit about communication tools. We're able to communicate over chat, over email, over Zoom. And I think, there's a lot of ways we can, keep working. I think one big change, is a lot of business. I think in our office, there are like still problems of like, how do we work with our coworkers? How do we do creative work? I think is a big pain point in the long term of like not being in the same room together, like not having a whiteboard. I think, another one is really productivity, for all my understanding, for a lot of like remote, people that are able to work from home actually hasn't decreased. In fact, like people on average are working longer, but, well-being has, I think, taken a really hard hit. And so, a lot of people aren't wondering like, how do I make sure people are working? They're wondering, how do I make sure people are feeling okay? How do I kind of check the pulse? How do I make sure people don't burn out? And so I think there's a lot of really interesting things that tech enables, like, and makes worse. And, maybe tech can also help improve as we, enter this new normal that Madison was talking about. And, I think another thing is, a lot of us, to close deals like sales, to hire candidates, you would travel, you would have to move for work, you would, go to conferences. And so I do think, people are both trying to find new ways to kind of have those cross company communications, and interactions. And, so maybe you're doing a webinar like this, like Alice was talking about the benefits of reaching more people and doing it at lower cost. And maybe we don't need conferences. Maybe it's that we just can use the tools we have. Maybe there's new tools that we need. But I do think that's a really interesting change that actually also affects a lot of, our personal lives as well. Like, will we go back to a ton of business travel? Will we go to conferences? What'll happen to cities like San Francisco when there are less conferences? So I think there's all, both interesting things that have been happening, that have been accelerated, and then, new problems that will create new opportunities and challenges as well.
All right, thanks, Nikki, for sharing your insights. Let me just ask you a very specific question in terms of how COVID, you talked about a number of things COVID is changing. Do you think, let's say, post-COVID, do you as an investor, would you feel comfortable cutting a deal over the cloud, without meeting the founder, right? This is also to my own purpose, because, I'm founding a company to help founders to meet with, advisors, mentors, including investors, right? So from an investor perspective, I know you work with partners and co-workers in your VC fund. Do you feel like it's just like Madison talked about how tech overall they're like changing, they're moving to remote first. Seems like they are comfortable. Some of the biggest companies, you know, like Twitter, they feel comfortable flip the switch. Would VC companies, at least from your personal experience, would you feel comfortable flip the switch, saying, I would feel comfortable doing a term sheet. I would feel comfortable funding someone with like transfer the bank account without meeting someone.
Yeah, so we've done 2 deals without meeting someone, a couple more with people we have met. So we have, I mean, we do small checks and a lot of them. And also, you know, I think the thing about, so I think we went into, like, from a venture capital perspective, people went into saying, like, there's a lot less urgency with venture capital because you don't have these revenue goals. You know, you raise a fund and you have 2 to 3-ish years to deploy it. So there's, you know, take a month or 2 off, that's okay. So I think, you know, when this first happened, people were like, okay, whatever, we can just sit out a couple months. And I think now that, you know, now that this isn't just a couple months of back to normal, now that, you know, all these companies are changing the way that they're doing things. And, you know, quite frankly, like, there's a lot of, you know, venture capitalists, like, we spend all day meeting strangers. I think, like, a lot of people who, you know, might have been doing this for 20 or 30 years and a little older are not so interested in meeting strangers in close quarters for the foreseeable future. And so, you know, I think there's a little less urgency. I mean, we've been at our normal pace. You know, we talked about slowing down, but, you know, there's also just great opportunities. So I think, yeah, a little slower, like people are taking longer to raise rounds. There's a little less, there's less event, like there were always events where, like, investors were talking about, hey, did you see this hot deal? Did you see that hot deal? There's less of that. So there's a little less of, like, oh, they're going to get to it before I get to it. So things are just moving slower, but, you know, deals are happening. I think deals are definitely happening more if you have tailwinds, right? I think, you know, things will pick up for more in sectors, you know, and, you know, things that, you know, I think all workplaces are doing in all sectors are, you know, again, another trend that's been happening that this really accelerates is just digitalization, right? Your business, right? If you didn't take digital payments, all of a sudden, you know, no one is going to come to you with cash. So you got to enable that. If you, you know, aren't focused on the revenue because things are slowed and you want to update your back office, or you need to get, you know, people can't drive by and find your business, they need to find you online. Like, people are making those investments. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of stuff on the tech investing side that now has been really obvious around, like, okay, digital health and, you know, food delivery. And I think now, you know, that's going to open up more as things start to pick up again into things that, you know, are just a generally, you know, helping, you know, companies go digital. So, and, you know, I think if you're in the travel and hospitality space, restaurant businesses, like, it's definitely tougher. Like not gonna say people are, you know, running to make those investments right now, but, you know, I think hopefully, you know, can weather the storm to a point where, you know, those are big industries. Like, we will go to restaurants again. We will travel again. It might look a little different for the foreseeable future or maybe forever, but, you know, I think those things will happen again too. Just will take even longer.
Got it. All right. I'm happy to hear you're cutting deals remotely. Carol, any questions from your side?
Yes. So here's a question. What industry adjacent to video communication are you seeing jobs or capital move to as work from home accelerate? Or if unknown, what would your hypothesis at this point?
Yeah, so I think, you know, there's still companies that are trying to fix a lot of problem that, you know, Zoom and Slack create by having this constant communication, or the lack of an office creates. So definitely capital flowing there. This is even more tangential, but I do think mental health is, you know, both from a personal perspective, people being stuck at home and, you know, the anxiety of the situation. Obviously, you know, I heard that, you know, prescriptions for anxiety and depression medicine actually went up like 40% from February to March, which is just absolutely astounding. But, you know, I think companies investing in, you know, how do they make their workplaces, you know, and invest in mental health, I think is also something that people are looking to support from a venture capital perspective. Security is kind of a little, less sexy, but how do you make sure, I don't know if you saw the like Zoom, like high school kids entering Zoom videos like a couple weeks ago, but companies feeling like, how do we make sure all our data is secure and that people can work, like all our material is safe when they're home. Like, I think that's definitely been something that we've been seeing around the office investments. And then in general, I think as people think about, they've had time maybe to focus on back office processes or see where they're cutting. Maybe they've furloughed employees, maybe they've let go of employees. And I think there will be a conversation around like, who do we bring back, or, what can be, potentially, made more efficient with software? How can we maybe bring back less people if we augment with certain tools? And I think, we'll see a lot of that happen as well as people start to think about growth again coming out of this.
Right, great, thanks. Right, if no further question from you, Kara, I'm gonna move on to Vivian. I'm very excited with what you're doing, Vivian. You are, in my view, you're in the forefront of creating something new. And I feel like COVID could actually potentially really accelerate this new, you call a new career model. I know you're focusing on leading business women. Would you like to introduce yourself and the business you're creating?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here with, a lot of really awesome and forward-thinking women. I think, today we've heard a lot from both the HR perspective, company perspective, as well as investor perspective. I think, I can definitely shed a little bit more light on from a talent as well as candidate perspective. So my company is called Rise. We are a flexible work platform for ambitious women. And really how our business models differs from a lot of the other gig economy platforms that you see out there is we sort of walk through the journey of an independent consultant, as I previously did myself. So we have 3 key pillars. The first pillar is connecting people to remote, project-based, and flexible jobs. So obviously something that is very relevant and something that we can't avoid today. And secondly is we imagine a system of on-demand benefits to replace the system of 9-to-5 perks that you used to get, at a full-time job. So things like health insurance, 401k, financial services, and planning. And lastly is really the idea of community. So that person-to-person connection that you get in the office that, obviously now as everyone is sheltering in place that we're not able to get. So Rise really started from a personally challenging time in my own professional career. I know that right now there are more than 30 million people in the US who are underemployed or unemployed or underemployed. And, this is an opportunity where people previously might not have thought about full-time, might not previously have thought about alternative sources of income or job, or if they were in a full-time capacity, are now seeing more of these trends towards, moving toward consulting or project-based roles. So for example, people who have been laid off are coming to our platform. But another thing that we're seeing is people who are currently in a job where they don't feel is secure are also flocking to our platform. So the old idea that, my 9-to-5 job is secure or I can get all the benefits I want is kind of not there anymore. People are sort of diversifying their income streams and no longer putting their eggs in just one basket. So then, obviously with the loss of jobs and opportunities, what we're seeing is also the loss of benefits. So, when you lose your job, immediately right after you realize that your health insurance is tied down to that job. So in the future, what we really imagine is a system in which there is an a la carte, on-demand ecosystem where you can select the health insurance that you want, regardless of what employer you are with. So we know prior to COVID that people were engaged in shorter and shorter months of tenure when it comes to a job. I think in the future that trend might continue, especially as people are finding success in maybe independent forms of work. And then lastly, having community building events sort of like this, I think we're all sort of feeling the isolation and the boredom that comes with just having meetings over the internet. So, we also imagine having a community where people can engage with each other, socialize with each other, and connect with each other on a more deeply and personal level. So prior to COVID, we had in-person events for independent and freelancers. And now, we've obviously moved a lot of these events online where people can talk about what are the next steps in their careers. What can they do to improve their resume if they haven't been in the job market for a while? Listening to the latest trends when it comes to what industries might be thriving post-COVID. So these are the kind of things that I think as people look for different forms of work, it's going to be here to stay. Like really, when you think about what is the future of work, it's not just the jobs and the companies, it's really about the people. I like to think of Rise as a people first company, which is why when we thought about how we're building this future of work and this ecosystem, it's really through the lens of work, life, and sort of everything in between. So that person to person connection, the relationship that you have with the work that you do, but also with the family and the life that you lead, right? It's so important too.
Thanks. I think that's fascinating. That just made me to think, the similarity between this model and maybe, kind of like shared economy, like Airbnb, Uber, probably about 10 years ago. I remember when I first heard of, rent out your own like room, or living room or bedroom to a stranger. That was a little bit harder to imagine.
Yeah.
But somehow 10 years later, it is definitely, part of the mainstream. It seems like it's a concept a lot of people accept already. So I assume, Vivian, like the model you're talking about is still at early stage, maybe it takes, I don't know, another 3 or 5 or even 10 years. I want to ask specifically, like what kind of, let's say, you talk about project-based work, like what type of project-based work, from your perspective, you think might be most suitable, for this kind of model, and over time, like what does it take for this new kind of quote unquote career, not only become a mainstream concept, like people would normally accept, but also, from like, you talk about a lot of supporting system has to be there, like a la carte healthcare system, and some other things. So can you shed more light on, short term, what might be the, sweet spot, to take this type of work, and longer term, what does it take to make it more mainstream or scale?
Sure. So I think the first part of your question, which is, this seems very similar to, it's gig economy, right? It's sharing economy, it's a gig economy, which is true. So the first wave of gig economy really were the companies like Uber and TaskRabbit and Airbnb. Primarily that was for low skilled work. And, today we're kind of seeing a lot of the ramifications when you take people just to be synonymous with a task or a gig, you don't provide that system of benefits, which is really not scalable, especially when you, level that up to knowledge workers. So, which is why for the second version of gig economy, I call it gig economy 2.0, thanks to the companies like Uber and TaskRabbit, it's now acceptable in our minds that work could be reshaped in this format, right? That it's acceptable to us now. So I think it has already paved the path for what this gig economy 2.0 will look like. We just have to go a step further to make sure that it is sustainable and successful for the people who do participate in it. So then that brings us to the question of what does project-based work look like, right? So I think a lot of the companies that, we've talked about today are, tech companies in Silicon Valley. I'm in New York myself, but we work with companies on both coasts. So for example, a company might be pivoting right now, right? So we've heard about restaurant suppliers that previously were only selling B2B, but now they're going online to B2C. That's a perfect project-based work for an industry in which previously they did not have this need, but now they have this need. They could hire a highly skilled expert who is familiar with DTC business models, who has experience with taking businesses online, and previously, you know, who might have had e-commerce at a company but was recently laid off. So that person will be a great candidate to now help this company bring their business online. And that could be done in a few months, in let's say 3 to 6 months. And it doesn't have to be there for the entire year, because once she's successfully done that, she can now go on to the next job or the next project. It's really exciting. It's in a short period of time. And at the same time, I think, you know, that consultant who's able to help the business is going to leave feeling like she's accomplished something.
Well, that's great. Carol, do you have some questions from your side?
None for the audience, but I have a question. Could you talk about the mood that you're seeing with your the members of your platform?
There's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of fear, but there's also a lot of creativity. So when it comes to fear, you know, the numbers are just staggering when it comes to unemployment. Everyone recognizes that with this level of furloughs and layoffs and hiring freezes, it's going to be really, really tough for people to get a job, maybe, you know, in the next 3 to 6 months. So instead, what people are doing, they're thinking creatively of what skill sets do they have and what can they do that they probably did not think about, even I would say back in February. So I'm seeing more people offering their services as SEO experts, as paid media strategists, you know, really tactical executional type of things that can move the needle in a business. I'm seeing more people who are for the first time creating their own websites and moving their portfolios online, even though if they're not, you know, portfolios are typically things for creative industries, like if you're a designer or if you are a software engineer. You know, business oriented and strategy oriented folks are kind of creating their own online profiles and showcasing people what it is that they can do. So I do think now is an opportunity for more of a creative economy. Instead of working from home, I think there's a movement towards entrepreneurship from home. If you look at sort of the stats from the 2008 recession, I think there was a number in there that self-employed businesses increased by almost 300%. And I think that's going to be the case this time around, and perhaps even greater than that, because the internet is definitely, you know, more mature. There are more platforms available for people to make money, and this idea of diversifying your income stream is something that is not going to be so I guess, foreign to people, you know, as your full-time job becomes something that you worry about day in and day out, it is time to think about, you know, what else is out there and how can I make sure that my job and my family are safe and secure.
And Vivian, I'll chime in here too, because I think this is relevant to the recruiting side as well. As we were talking about this at one point, is with a changing definition of career success post-COVID, and what a post-COVID career trajectory looks like versus it's changing. As you said, it has been changing quite frequently over the last 5 to 10 years, is that you're no longer in roles for 10 to 15 years, you're in roles for 2 to 3 years. That might come down even more, and that's okay. And I think that's what is exciting about Rise, and what Rise is doing and promoting is that it's promoting this project-based work. And when you have potentially 25% of people in the country have a gap in their resume from, you know, for an entire year and a half, we do have to start rethinking the definition of career success, and that time does not equal success. So yeah.
Yeah, and I will say that for, you know, some people it is not feasible at this moment to really, you know, take up work, as they have to maybe take care of, you know, a sick family member or children. But, you know, it is something that is more flexible than if you were to participate in back in the workforce full time, if we do continue with working from home and working remotely.
Great. Carol, I know we're almost up against the time. Should we, I know we are supposed to have a general Q&A session. What's your take on that?
I think people have asked most of the questions. So if anybody has any questions for the panelists, please add them to the Q&A section so we can answer them.
In the meantime, I think we're towards the end. Maybe I'll just ask the whole panelist if you have a final word to the audience, whether some advice or something you'd like to say. Feel free to say it now.
Well, I'll go back to kind of Vivian's point. I know that there is a lot of fear out there, but I think we can kind of restructure this and think about, obviously, the opportunities that lie when you have a remote first culture. Embracing that sooner rather than later is probably the way to go, from at least what I'm seeing at the big tech companies today.
Right, Nikki, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, in general, we are working remote first, and I think the future of work is changing a lot, and will be, you know, more remote and all of that. But I think, you know, just also remember that, like, right now we're working at home during a crisis, and it is exhausting and it is anxiety ridden, and it's tough not knowing what's coming, even when you still have your job, let alone, you know, the uncertainties with, you know, everyone who's struggling, you know, to figure out what to do now if they've lost it. So I think just, like, also give yourself a break, like, give the people you work with a break. We're all just, like, trying to do our best in our apartments and homes. So, you know, I guess just hang in there.
Thank you. Right, we're hanging there by having events like this, I guess.
Exactly. Thank you, Alice, for bringing a community together.
Yeah, Lauren, a final word?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have the same message, which is try to stay positive. I mean, I think, like I said at the beginning, if this is a good time for you to reevaluate whether you are thinking about your current job or have to be thinking about a new job, you know, think about what moves you and what gets you excited and try to work your way into that. And then the other piece I will say is that while a lot of companies are on hiring freezes, others are still hiring. So there is stuff out there.
Right, you can reach out to Lauren if you're looking for something. I'm gonna do a plug-in for you here. Vivian, parting words?
Yeah, I think the best ideas definitely come from times of difficulty and uncertainty. So Alice, I really like the quote that you said at the beginning. If you look at, there's a chart somewhere, you know, this meme of, like, the best companies that came out of the 2008 recession. You know, there were the billion-dollar unicorns of today. I do believe that this is a moment of reset where there's going to be a changing landscape of what the next batch of companies will look like. And who knows, maybe, you know, if you are out of a job now, this is an opportunity for you to think about what that might look like. Or if your company is in a difficult position, maybe it is time to think more creatively of what that pivot or direction might be.
Got it. Actually, Kara, I just got a question from Carol. Seems like someone asked, do you have any advice for recent college grad? Or I would just generalize, any advice for recent graduates, for 2020 graduates?
I'll go. I think project-based work is exactly what Vivian's company is doing, and we're connecting people to is a great way to go right now. As companies, like we said, there are a lot of companies on hiring freezes. There are still a lot of companies that are hiring, but if you can think about a project-based work for 3 to 6 months, I think that's probably or till the end of the year. That's probably a good tactic.
Got it. All right, sounds good. I mean, I'm pretty happy we got the full house. You know, if you're new graduates, look for project-based, you know, Vivian's the contact. Entrepreneurship, Nikki and Alice, right? Lauren, there are still some companies out there looking for candidates, as well as Madison. So with that, I guess, Carol, I guess we could conclude here. What do you think?
Yes. So this was a great panel, and thank you so much for everybody taking the time to speak to us. And I know it's kind of late, especially on the East Coast. So I would like to thank Lauren, Madison, Nikki, and Vivian for taking the time to speak to us. and it's such great to have an all women's panel that are such amazing women and know so much about the space. So thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Feel free to reach out, everyone.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. Kara, if you, I think we have a slide with everyone's contact. Kara, if you can put up that slide up. We also have a slide on upcoming events of WAFA. Kara, I know I'm speaking for you.
Yes.
So anyway, you're gonna put up the slides here.
Yes, 1 second. Sharing slide.
And you can just put present.
Share.
Present, yeah.
So here's everybody's.
If you want, you can take a picture of this slide. And then we have upcoming events, right?
Here are our upcoming events.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Carol, anything else we should close?
No, nothing else. This video is recorded and we will send out a copy of it probably in the next few days. So I just want to thank you everybody again for being with us tonight.
All right, thank you. Take care. Bye.